Welcome to YT Preacher. I'm J-Man, and I'll be leading you on this journey. So here we are. We're looking at Genesis, and what we're going to look at today in Genesis, we're going to look at Genesis 1, the whole of Genesis 1. What is Genesis 1? Genesis 1 is the creation story. Why are we looking at that? Because in my Bible, the ESV, which I've told you about, the pericope, which is the story of the creation story, the first creation story, in the English Standard Version is all found in Genesis 1, verse 1 through verse 31. What that means is that there's a segment of Scripture from chapter 1 that I want to look at. And before I actually start looking at it verse by verse, I want to look at the whole thing so we kind of understand what I'm going to look at, which means I may repeat myself when I'm going verse by verse. But it also means that we've got a full view of the text before we actually look at the text. So when we're looking at Genesis 1:1, we got to figure out, or Genesis 1 as a whole, we got to figure out what we're looking at. First of all, Genesis chapter 1 is typically seen as a kind of poetry sort of thing. It deals with chaos and creation. It deals with good. It deals with how the world works to the Jewish mind, to the Hebrew mind. The idea of creation, why is it the way it is? It also deals with God speaking things into existence. Why is it different from chapter 2? Chapter 2, which we will look at when I get to chapter 2, has another creation story, but it's not in a daily format. Also, when we look at this creation format, God's going to say, it is good. What is good? Is everything good, or is just what he speaks into existence good? And why is that good? What does it mean for it to be good? Is it morally good? Other things we're going to look at. We're going to look at what differences there are in this and other Near Eastern, other creation stories. As I look at some commentaries, as I've been looking at some commentaries, which is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be looking at commentaries, and I'm going to come up with my own ideas of what it says. But as I've been looking at some of these commentaries, they've been talking about how there's familiarity with this and other Near Eastern text where there's chaos. There seems to be this hovering God over water, kind of like it's nurturing an egg. I don't know about those other stories, but there is chaos in those other stories. And this one is different because of the reason man was made, which we'll get into when we get to man. Also, there's another question we can ask. I'd like to ask this one because I know the answer, and I may tell you the answer now. But I'll let you think about it for a second. Why is it that when we read it, it says there was evening and there was morning? It is intentional. A lot of Jewish, Near Eastern cultures or other cultures, even our own culture, when we look at time, midnight is the transference from one day to the next day. So saying that as the sun sets, a day ends and a new day begins, it actually makes sense for a lot of cultures. Some cultures it happens at night. Some cultures it happens as night is falling. Some cultures it happens just before night has fallen. So this evening to morning thing, morning is not the new day is at night, which is kind of interesting also. There's other things that we will be looking at, because we'll look at, at the verses themselves and see what it is that they do say. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking a chance to look at the pericope of Genesis chapter 1. In the ESV, chapter 1 is a full chapter. In other versions of the Bible, it actually goes into chapter 2, which is different but interesting. That's not the reason I like the ESV. I've kind of already explained that, but it is interesting that the ESV chooses to stop at chapter 1 and make the next portion of creation all part of chapter 2, where other Bibles like the New International Version, it goes into chapter 2. So thank you for joining me, and God bless.